Okay. Hello and welcome to today's Transformation Journeys webinar. Today we're going to be covering the topic of designing your sales transformation, where we're specifically going to be focusing in on maximizing a crisis, how to rebuild your focus towards the second half of the year, and how do we use technologies and tools to support our sales growth. My name is Glen Barber and I'm lead partner at Awaken Group. Awaken Group is a transformation design firm that's been operating across APAC for over 10 years now. And we support clients through their organizational transformation, through strategy, through leadership and design. So just before I introduce our expert panelists, I just want to call out a few housekeeping points. On your screens, you will see down the bottom that we have Q&A and we have chat. So during today's session, if there's something that sparks your interest, please throw something into the chat section, which would be great. And if you have a question for our panelists, we will create time at the end of the session to be able to answer as many questions as possible. So if you can put those in the Q&A, if we don't actually get to all of the questions today, we'll most certainly be able to respond over the coming days or hours to you. So yeah, so just the Q&A and the chat down the bottom. The other part too is there will be a poll. So you will see a poll that will come up on the screen in a few minutes. And so if you can just answer the poll as quickly as you possibly can, and then we'll be able to use that as a base for part of the discussion today. So at this very point, let me introduce you to our two experts, our senior consultants. So we have two very special guests today. We have Grant and we have David, who are going to be joining us for this 45-minute conversation. Both of these gents run very successful sales practices where they support teams on their sales transformation. Now, Grant I've known for a number of years now, and Grant actually has over 20 years of experience from both the sales as well as a BD point of view. He's worked all across EMEA and has been based in Singapore for just under 10 years, where he currently lives. So Grant also was very senior within sales capacity within Bloomberg and has worked extensively across the fintech space. And he's got a real passion for customer success, which you'll see that will come out in today's discussion. So welcome, Grant, to today. And we also have David McMurdo, who will be joining us today for today's discussion. I've recently met David when we're working towards a sales transformation program where David is leading the charge in regards to hospitality transformation within the APAC region. So David has many, many years of experience. He's based in Sydney, as I said, leads a very successful consultancy and knows pretty much everything that I've certainly learned in regards to sales leadership. And he's been a great coach and mentor in that space. So welcome, David, to today's sales transformation discussion. Okay, wonderful to have you, both of you gents here. So let's get started. We just move to the next slide, please. Okay, so just set some context for today's discussion. First, in particularly the first part of our discussion. There is nothing certain. You know, we've all been through a very much unprecedented time right now. Though there's also been a whole range of crisis that has been occurring for many, many years now. And in fact, for somebody who'd be sitting at the 50-year-old age bracket, have most likely witnessed and been part of in their professional career a whole range of these crises. And there is nothing surer than by understanding the crisis and understanding what's actually happened post-crisis previously, then you can actually have that resilience to be able to bounce back. So we just wanted to do a really quick poll at this moment, just to get an understanding about the people who are online, because we've got people dialing in from across APAC. I know we've got New Zealand, we've got Australia, we've got Singapore, Malaysia, a whole range of other places. And please share in the chat where you are actually from. It's always good for our panelists to understand. So if you just drop the poll, please. Okay, so we can just take 15, 20 seconds and just let us know which of these crises have affected your professional life in the past. So multi-choice there. Hello, Yinga from Nigeria. There you go. So not just Asia and Australia, New Zealand, also got Africa. Hello, Shirley. So for those who have just joined now, I've just had a few people just join, just answering the poll, just to get an understanding about, through your professional life, which of these crises have impacted you? Wonderful. GFC, SARS. The energy crisis, we'll actually draw a bit of a connection, I think, from the energy crisis to Grant, in regards to what actually occurred then and how that actually relates to the to COVID-19 as well. That's wonderful. So it's good to see we've got a whole range of different, as far as it can be good to see across us. We've got people who have been part of. So it'll be interesting just to see that connection between what's occurred in the past and how you're utilising that now moving forward. So Grant, I'd love to just hand over to you at this point, just to get your perspective around this.
Thanks, Glenn, and good morning, everyone. I think the good news is that there are aspects from nearly all of these crises that you can see within COVID-19. The bad news is they're all happening at once now. Understanding and analysing and adapting to the data here is really key. So you can be realistic about where you spend your time and the value that's derived from it and adjust your strategy accordingly. I came across some really interesting research last year from Bain & Company. And you can see here in the chart, which I'll explain in a second, they were predicting a recession in 2019 and were looking at how best to prepare for it. And what I think is insightful about the analysis is that out of the almost 4,000 companies included, 415 of them were able to accelerate their profitability. As you can see in the chart, even during the recession, the GFC, they accelerated their profitability by 70%. And then overall until 2017 by 14%, whereas the other companies were pretty much flat or at zero. I think what's interesting is there were three areas that were focused on and learnings from the GFC. One was how do you control your costs early, financial discipline, aggressive commercial plays, and M&A. Now, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the cost restructuring and aggressive commercial plays, because I think they're important as a context now in our COVID situation. Interesting enough, cost restructuring was not counting headcount, which may be the first assumption. It was improving processes. And you can see leading up to this crisis that we have at the moment, companies like FedEx have concentrated on using robotic process automation, RPA, to kind of streamline their administrative processes, whether that's credit card reconciliations, finance processes, tax, payroll, these kind of things. And other firms like Honeywell in the energy sector, have used augmented reality tools to be able to look at how they can reduce the headcount needed to go to rigs for analysis and spend less time on the platforms. A lot of these firms have also invested heavily in R&D and in product. So not just in stopping their product rollouts, they've been investing actively to continue to plan for the future. And I think, sales teams have had to also really focus very hard on how they're spending their time. What are the key accounts? And what is not only the most pressing opportunity, but what is the potential lifetime value of an account? And what is the overall profitability? And I think focusing on these areas and making sure that time is spent wisely is really key. So I think there are some really key learnings that have come out of that research and of the time in the GFC. One last point, most companies in this bracket of 415 companies managed to continue investing in marketing. They didn't stop marketing like a lot of their competitors did. And that was very, very beneficial as they came out of the recession.
That's great. Thanks, Grant. David, can you build on that as well, please?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can just go on to the next slide, I think that sort of probably builds from there. Look, it's really interesting if we look at a number of the bullet points here, and I'll talk about them one by one. A lot of them, for people on this call, would certainly sort of say, well, surely that's just standard best practice. The interesting thing is, as we led up to the COVID situation, a lot of businesses were doing very well. A lot of markets were going pretty well. And there's a lovely expression that a client once shared with me, which he actually said, it's interesting because success gets in the way of best practice because we get quite complacent in terms of what we're doing. So what this has really put in focus for me, as it has through, I think, 5 other downturns that I've seen through my career, is that there are some fundamental things that we have to do very well. Fundamental things we have to be obsessed about. And I'm going to start off with, again, changing conversion rates. Now, this might sound incredibly naive and a bit sort of basic, but somebody once said to me, the only thing that changes in a downturn is our conversion rate. And I smiled when he said that, and I said, so what do you mean? He goes, well, look, the average order size typically goes down. The hit rates that we get in terms of the proposals that we put forward might go from 1 in 2 to 1 in 5, and the velocity in terms of the time it takes to get those orders over the line actually changes as well. So fundamentally, if we want to just stand still, we've got to take all those things into consideration when we're building our plans, managing and leading our teams, especially our sales and marketing teams, if we are to actually maintain our business as we go forward. So who are the critical people to do that? Well, in my view, it's very much sales leadership. And I love this expression from an organization called Zenga Folkman, who talk about sales leadership is a contact sport. We've all probably seen sales leaders over the years that sort of fly the desk, have a light touch with their salespeople, especially when things are going well. But my view has always been not to be obtrusive, but to have that touch and the appropriate touch with your salespeople so that you absolutely know what's going on. And sales leaders, we believe, have to manage 3 key things in their sales team. That's the quantity of the effort that they're putting in, where they're putting their effort, and then the quality of what they're doing. And one of the things I've seen over the last 3 months here in Australia and with another couple of clients of mine up in Asia have been the process of what I call client coverage. One of the things that clients want is contact from us. And I'm not talking about email. I'm talking about they want to talk to somebody. They want to have somebody engaging with them who's got a genuine interest in them and their business and is helping to try and support them through this particular crisis. And what a classic example is an organization, quite a large one. We're averaging about 1,500 face-to-face visits a month pre the crisis. Through the crisis, by using things like Zoom and telephone and other types of fairly base technologies, we're actually taking that level of contact up to 12,000 per month. It meant that their client coverage was going on average from 15% of their clients a month to 18%. They were just basically keeping in contact, understanding what was going on. We were there for you. And the quality of those conversations, along with the quantity and the focus, really hit home. Consistent communication, absolutely key, both to our customers, of course, and also internally to our teams. And then something I'm just going to hand over to Grant on, which is this whole thing around customer obsession. Making sure we're obsessed with our customers, giving them the right level and quality of insight to help them make the right decisions as they move through this crisis. Grant?
Thanks, David. Yeah, there's two things, customer obsession, but also control. And when I say control, I'm talking about focus on what you can control in your organization. Yeah. I think those are 2 things that I've learned very much from the previous crisis we've been through. And And I think, AWS talk a lot about being customer obsessed, and it's important by finding the problems the customers have and being able to add value to solve them. In practice, this means managing the opportunity available and evolving your strategies, because things have changed. You really can't influence whether your customers are being made redundant, but you can manage who you target, how you prioritize, and how much follow-up you do. Most salespeople give up after a couple of attempts at follow-up. I remember in 2008, I started to manage a $500 million business in London, and that was banks and brokers. 4 weeks later, the bank Lehman Brothers went bust, so that was really the wrong territory to be managing. So thousands of people were being made redundant, and we had to adjust our strategy. We need to be really focused on the customer. We were a SaaS, a software as a service organization. And that meant we really had to focus on the prospects and users that were still there. And so we had to evolve our strategy to really focus on the detail of where the revenue was at risk, the prospect universe that we still could sell to, because you have to really focus on the hand you've been dealt and therefore manage it in the best way you can. So for me, customer success is crucial in being able to implement projects, and it's a kind of relatively new term around teams that are in sales organizations. But they're very key, because that focus on execution, getting projects done really, really to a high standard, and also then allowing you to be able to understand new opportunities within customers or get referrals is key. It also means the sales and business development teams need to be leading with insight. They need to be aggregating their industry expertise and really adding value to customers and prospects that differentiate them. And so that focus, spending time with customers, is absolutely critical. And I couldn't say more, and I'll talk about it a couple of times. Being on the phone or virtually in front of customers is paramount. Too many emails are being sent, too many texts, not enough human contact, understanding what's going on in the business and being able to objection handle. And I think the last thing I'd say is, you need to use this crisis to play to your strengths. I've been working with a customer who are a food industry group. They were very worried about renewals in this period. What they weren't doing is really thinking about capitalizing on the amount of unique content they were providing to their existing customers. And with that allowed them to have better renewal conversations now and really leverage their expertise to be able to bring in new customers. So thinking through those points are really important. Thanks.
Yeah, Grant, I'd love to hear both of you in a little while talk more too about in the customer success, the metrics. What are those metrics? What do those metrics look like as organisations do pivot and move forward? So what I've just heard from you both there too is it's not a crisis is not about bunkering down and ripping up the old strategy and throwing it out the window. It's not about that at all, is it? It's about new focus.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's about adapting and evolving. That's the key for me. You've got to be able to really think about the new reality you're facing. And I think there are a couple of things. It depends really, with your business plan, how good it is in the first place. And then secondly, how well is it being executed? Because they're two totally different things. There's a danger, and you kind of alluded to this, in fact, David alluded to this earlier, is that in the good times, companies have top-down business plans that have worked well in booming markets, but they may not have had the granularity that was necessary or the buy-in from the sales people that allows them to be successful in this environment. You really need to understand how much incoming business is within your percentage of sales and how much is actually proactive sales. And this is really being found out now in this kind of environment. Salespeople really need to be involved in the process of the business plan, and they need to then have a business plan that aligns with their team and department objectives. It's clearly, to Glen's point on customer success, it's much easier to keep a customer than acquire a new customer. So that's why the customer success teams are so important. And there are plenty of businesses where there's a lack of ownership by individuals as they've not been part of go-to-market strategies. So I think that's really key for that organization to be on message within those business plans.
Yeah.
I think the other piece that's key is you've got to be really honest, right? It's important to be very granular when analyzing where strategies are working and not working. And then you've got to adapt. You've got to revise them, or in some cases, you've got to drop and move on and prioritize where you're going to be more successful. And you just got to be honest with yourselves. We've seen some sales organizations have really written off Q1. Others have been very successful in Q1. So it really depends on your industry, your environment, and how you react. The two other pieces that are critical for me are pipeline and sales structure. Pipeline, this is the time to be really granular. I think, there are always going to be pieces of the pipeline which are stale. There's always going to be pipeline that's being consistently rolled over. But now is the time, as David said, it's got to be a contact sport from a leadership perspective. You've really got to be looking and understanding what's in your CRM and your forecasts. But it's a fantastic opportunity, really, to be able to coach your salespeople, use tribal training to actually get your senior salespeople to step up and help the team and work as a unit to be successful in this really tough time. It also means you've got to be focused on how you're using your marketing, your technology, and focused productivity, rather than just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And then lastly, on that sales structure, it's time to look at it. Do you have enough resource in your business development, within your inside sales, your account management, your specialist sales? Is that the right mix for this environment? That's something critical to be able to look at and to be able to see how you evolve. And that's how I was helping a $1 billion sales company 3 months ago to try and work out how they became less organic and more focused on an aggressive sales strategy while maintaining their culture in the organization.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that, and I think the structure thing is a key one, but it's one of those things that I've done quite a lot of work on in the recent past, is not only to review the structures of the business, but also to review just their general go-to-market approach. One of the things I do a lot of work on is what I call customer journey mapping. In other words, identifying how the customer is buying. And there's no doubt that we are already seeing a real moving feast on that. A lot of clients of mine, they're seeing their customers buy in a very different way, maybe a bit more robust, maybe putting more processes in place, maybe putting more gates to go through in place around the way that they buy. So one of the things we've got to do is be able to identify that so that we can adapt our sales processes and our go-to-market processes to align to that. Because if we don't, we'll get caught out. There's no doubt about that. It is an ever-changing feast at the moment. We've got to make sure we're there. The other comment I would just support Grant on is the pipeline piece. Pipeline management, CRM, is a great coaching tool if it's done well. It shouldn't just be a repository of information that's referred to see how badly or how well we're doing. It should be a coaching tool. Looking at all the gates that we go through, looking at all the conversion ratios and having those quality discussions to make sure we're doing the very best we can be.
Yeah, I think that's great sharing, guys. Thank you both for that. And just to Emma's point there too in the chat, in regards to, this is the time now to actually develop even deeper relations and not pushing. Because I know certainly my inbox is flooded with organizations that are panicking in sales, and their brand is dropped. Their brand drops in my mind each time I receive one of those emails pushing a sales that I actually don't need. So having that planned approach is and pivoting is important. One of our clients had spoken to me a while ago and said, "Hey, we're purely focusing on our continuity planning, and then it's all about the second half of the year is all about getting our revenue back. Everything we've lost in the first half, we really need to focus hard for that second half of the year." So there's going to be many people on the webinar today, Grant and David, who are in that space, whose revenue is down 5%, 10%, 20%, 50%, many different types. What are you actually seeing within sales teams, and how are they actually adapting now? Grant?
Thanks, Glenn. I think it really depends on the industry. I mean, I have to say that, I've been quite focused on, a little bit of F&B, but very much on financial services and technology. I think it really depends. We're going to see some stats now around how businesses have evolved. Look, I was talking to the head of Asia of a multi-billion-dollar workflow company from Europe. They're down. Their sales are now down 2/3. They're 2/3 of budget for this quarter. They're realizing they need to pivot. They need to improve the way they focus on customers, how they spend time on the phone, all these things. There are other in the information services game, which is from Bloomberg, Refinitiv, those kind of companies, IHS Market. They're having a boon now because they are information providers. Everyone wants information to make decisions. So it really depends on where you are. I think what we've seen, there's some stats here from Revenue Collective, which is an organization of sales leaders across the world. If you took a look at the top left, what's interesting is, unsurprisingly, this is from early March, as the sales environment was clear and the crisis evolved, what you saw is people starting to reduce headcount and coming up to almost 50% of organizations within this collective reducing headcount. If you scan right, what you'll find is that clearly during that time, everyone paused headcount and headcount hiring. But as you got to the end of that, in the last 2 weeks, what's really interesting is people seem to be a little bit more comfortable in their skin, and they've started rehiring. So if you now see, sorry, I'm blocking it. Yeah, 52.6% of those individuals within the senior, these are all CROs, global heads of sales, regional heads of sales, have started rehiring. And you can see that by the confidence on the bottom left-hand side, which has gone up almost a point and had been flat for the first month of the crisis or so, and now has kind of gone up again. People have got a bit more comfortable in their skin. They're starting to adapt to their processes. They're using different ways of outreach, and they're refining their strategy. And then finally, the last thing that I think is really interesting, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, the kind of maroon color, whatever color that is, kind of tells you what has been the percentage of companies that think they would beat their second quarter targets. And that's now started to shoot up towards 25%, which is not unreasonable given the challenges facing the environment. But obviously 75% are not. What's really interesting is that you have now 31.5%, if you look to the far right bottom, which are people who think they're going to beat their Q3 target already. So that says a lot to me around how people are looking at this and how their thinking is evolving. So that's just a few thoughts on that. But I do think it depends on which industry you're within. There are real nuances around how you attack the challenges that we face.
Yeah, agree.
David, do you have some thoughts there around the long term versus the short term?
Look, I think there's a real balance to play here. I think I've got a lot of clients at the moment, and it really is, it's quite a chunk of creative tension, really. They still have these long-term ambitions based on plans that they might have put together before COVID. What obviously is in play now is some short-term priorities, in some cases almost to keep the doors open. So it's really this creative tension that we've got to actually work through. I think most of my clients are reevaluating the strategies that they put together, looking at what they can do to adapt and, as Grant so rightly says, evolve, to see if they need to change things in the short term. And the other point I'll just pick up on from what Grant said is part of the service that my business does is we actually partner with a sales recruitment organisation, and they've had an appalling time over the last 3 or 4 months where literally all hire was frozen. They're seeing that start to come through now. So I concur with Grant on that. People are starting now to plan for the future. You could say maybe even too late here in Australia, given that the lockdown is now, we've certainly come through that. But it's really making sure we've got the solid foundations for the next phase.
Yeah, great. Okay, so keen now to actually, first of all, from a Q&A point of view, if you've got a particular question that you would like Grant or David to answer, if you put that in the Q&A, then we will get to that in about 10 minutes, 8-10 minutes. So any questions, specific questions, please throw them in the Q&A. Just curious in regards to, and you could weave into this next question around how are those organisations going to get started with the changes that you've spoken about? How do they actually really, get it moving? I'd love to hear just the connection there too about the metrics. So if you could just weave that into your response, and also the value and the importance set at sales leadership, around the leadership. So just really curious around organisations getting started to implement the changes you're talking about. What does that look like in practical terms?
Yeah.
Grant, you want to lead us there?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think there's a few things, you know, and I think technology plays a key piece of that. You know, I've got a wild thought actually. We need to use the phone more. The phone is a key piece of technology that's underutilized. You know, and the reality is that, you know, people are afraid to use it. Even I was talking about that multi-billion-dollar workflow organization. Their salespeople aren't comfortable enough on the phone. So this is something that leadership have to focus on, and I think they have to lead by example. You know, we talked a lot in our discussions leading up to this webinar on the importance of player managers and really getting involved in the sales process as a coach, as David's already talked about, and that's really, really critical if you're going to be successful. So I think that's one thing that has to be focused on. We talked a little bit about CRM. For me, CRM is key to be able to manage your information. But clearly, if you have garbage in, you're going to have garbage out. So really, being in an environment where quality information, interactions are being logged, you've got a really good handle on pipeline. You're not just calling someone in for a good talking to because of their pipeline with the CRM. You're actually helping them, as David said, coaching them through it, giving them opportunities to be able to build that out, working with them with customer deals, using senior leadership to be able to make that happen. I think the other piece that we must recognize, you know, that we're going to hopefully get back to a stage, and Australia is a bit further than Singapore at the moment, of human contact. David's got a really interesting story about somebody who did take a flight to go and see a customer recently he might want to talk about. But there is a balance between, you know, we will get back to face-to-face communication at some point, but the reality is it's going to be more limited. But there have been a lot of productivity benefits to actually being able to work from home and be able to ramp up the amount of calls and interactions that we've had. The balance is, how do you not kill people by having had too much always on culture, and being able to balance that with actually going and seeing customers as well. David, I know you just want to comment on that customer story you had, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, look, it was really interesting. I've got a very good friend of mine who runs Australia's most successful independent advertising agency, and she's been doing literally 14 hours a day on Zoom for about 11 weeks. And they had an opportunity to pitch to one of their big customers, which is Disney, down in Melbourne, and she's Sydney-based. And she actually literally couldn't wait to get on a plane to get down there. You know, the customer was delighted that she did it. She was quite pleased, although she did say the only thing Melbourne Airport was lacking was the tumbleweeds rolling through the sort of the check-in areas. But and I think the $1,400 return airfare was a bit of a shock. But you know, not bad for a 1-hour flight. But you know, people are craving that interaction still, but it's how we do it. You know, there's been, McKinsey's have done quite a bit of research just recently, and a lot of people have embraced, obviously, remote technology, or shall I say virtual technology. Just picking up on one of the questions that somebody asked, they said, if we haven't got tech-savvy customers, how do we interact with them? Well, I'll pick up on Grant's point. The phone, you know, should be the absolute minimum we should be using, rather than literally the email. But the key, I think, going forward is going to be not just getting back into those old habits again, of it has to be face-to-face. You know, if we're using things like customer categorization, you know, those lower tier customers, your C's and D's, if you want to call them that, how often are we interacting with them? What form of communication are we using to interact with them? We still want to have high contact points, but you know what? I'm not going to drive 50 kilometers to go and see them anymore. I really am going to do that virtually. So it's about working smarter as well as harder, I think, as we come through, you know, the age that we're finding ourselves in. And just picking up on the next slide, and one of our final slides, which is, there's no doubt that the climate for business has changed. And I've always been a great believer in coaching. Somebody once said to me, look, I've got a pretty good team. You know, I'm very light touch with them in terms of coaching. As somebody said to me many years ago, it's interesting, Roger Federer still has a coach. It almost doesn't matter how good you are, the environment you're working in changes, your competition can change, the product mix that you've got changes. what's happening generally in the environment changes, and coaching is a key part to make sure you're absolutely fit for purpose as we move forward. Coaching is also a motivational tool, remember. It gives people the ability to win more often, gives them that sense of achievement. It gives you a chance to give them recognition, praise, and feedback. It gives you an opportunity to make sure that they're really enjoying the job role that they're undertaking. And especially when we're in the crises that we are in the moment, we want our teams to be 100% motivated. We do not need them to be looking and navel gazing and being negative about the environment they're working in. We can't have limiting beliefs in the environment we're in. But most importantly, it is about getting our teams to think about managing not only our customers for those classic return on investment opportunities, but also keep looking for what I call rope opportunities. Look out there for the pain that the customer is experiencing, so we can help and support that customer in their business in the short term as well as the long term. And that really leads to that focusing on customer success. We want to be seen as the individual who they're talking to that is, here's Grant. This is the guy that helps me in my business. This is the guy that's helped and supported me through this crisis. Not, this is Grant who phoned up every 3 weeks to see if I had an order for him yet. And that is a huge differentiator. And a lot of my customers have learned that over the last couple of months, but there's a lot of people who haven't. And I think that is a key differentiator.
Yeah.
Grant, thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. The trusted advisor piece is something that Gartner talk about a huge amount, and it's starting to appear in a whole bunch of different publications. The reality is that is hard to do, but it takes a lot of effort and coaching. Being in front of your customers, giving them insight on the industry, getting them to come to you to solve problems rather than just order is crucial. Being that person that they understands your industry, understands their pain points, and is able to consistently come back and help them with that is crucial. So that's really, really important.
Yeah, one of the things we're spending a lot of time on now is really trying to get people to have a far deeper understanding of their clients than they have had previously. A lot of clients we see have a very superficial understanding of order schedules and a bit of history maybe around relationships, but don't really understand what are the key business and value drivers that we can actually align to with the solutions we've got. And that for me is being a real differentiator in some of my clients in the marketplace at the moment.
Yeah, I would add one thing to that, is that you should test the relationships that you have. How strong are those relationships? And when I say relationship, I'm not talking about going and playing golf or going for a drink or lunch or whatever. I'm talking about, do they see you as that trusted advisor? Can you pick up the phone to the COO, the CEO, or the CTO and get that meeting? Is that how strong your relationship is? And I think that really sorts the weak from the strong in terms of relationship management.
I've got a lovely little quote for that. I was with one of the managing partners of KPMG about 3 or 4 years ago, and he said, Dave, relationships now are all about thinking, not drinking. Which is a lovely summary. Lovely summary.
Yeah. Just one thing I want to just go back to, if we could just go back to the previous slide, just a quick note on how technology can help you. I mean, I talked about obviously CRM and the phone, and those are crucial to get right. As you start to think about your longer term strategy, there are companies out there who are looking to really help you in your sales organization. And I think, Clary is one of them. There's a lot of problems with sales forecasting. There's a lot of issues with knowing whether pipeline is real or not, and getting to the deals early enough that on the rocks, so that you can make sure you put some additional effort into it and support those salespeople and coach them into improving that sales process. So Clary really gives you a lot of insights on forecasting, on deal management, and integrates analytics and AI. Gong is also very interesting because that actually takes recordings of your calls, meetings, and also emails, and it integrates them into one seamless platform that allows you to be able to understand what's working for your organization, where you need to coach the team, and how you can improve the messaging that's going out to your customers, all by aggregating everything into one. And finally, this outreach platform that you see on the right is also very interesting because it allows you to be able to automate a lot of the tasks that are challenging. Outreach brings together instant messaging, automatic emails, LinkedIn, phone calls, scheduling, all into one platform that allows you to be more effective in being able to reach clients and understand how you can bring that sales process to a quicker close. So there's lots of technology that takes implementation. The phone and CRM you can use right now.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I just want to just on point of time, because we're coming close to the end there. If you have any questions, please enter those now. So please enter those in. Gents, there's a couple of questions there. Love to get your thoughts. The question there from Emily. How do you sell in a cost-cutting climate without sounding inconsiderate?
Well, for me, this is, I think, again, if you can really identify what the customer's core business drivers are. I mean, if it is purely cost-cutting, you've got to be able to deliver solutions to whatever their new budgets are to be able to still add value in their business. But my view would always be, what are the other business drivers in that particular client? A lot of people obviously are under huge cost pressures at the moment, but they may well have different business and value drivers. You know, they still might want to still be trying to grow their revenue. They still might want to be, you know, managing their processes more efficiently. How can we align to those whilst still recognizing that they have cost pressure and challenges around that?
Yeah.
And so I think the real question is value. What value are you giving to the organization? How is that driving their efficiency? How is that driving their profitability and driving their revenues? Because those are the two things that are really going to make them think. The other piece around that is, what does the competitive landscape look like? You know, the reality is in the GFC, we spent a lot of time making sure that we were getting rid of competitors and replacing that with a better service that we had, so they didn't have to spend more money. So looking at the budgets they have, working with the budgets they have, and getting them to understand the value that you can create for their organization is totally critical. Comes back to that trusted advisor conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So David, you're working with quite a few companies from the hospitality sector. Grant, you're doing a lot in the fintech and then with wholesale retail. What metrics are you putting in place with these guys?
Look, one of the challenges with the hospitality sector, and in particular with the hotel industry, and I know we have people on from that group at the moment, is one of the big challenges in Australia, bar the fact that some of the hotels got work from the quarantine piece, was that obviously the bottom's fallen out of that market amazingly. The big challenge obviously is that a lot of people have what they call furloughed a lot of their staff. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a couple of groups have done is they furloughed 95+% of their sales teams. And now they're suddenly trying to re-galvanize those teams that had a lot of their noses put out for sort of 2 months to get back on, you know, into the business again, get back onto the phones, start developing those relationships again. So, you know, in that instance, they're starting again to start thinking about managing their key clients. They're starting again around client coverage as the key metrics. But my only comment would be, I think it's been a huge mistake to furlough the number of sales teams or number of salespeople in their teams, because they're really having to come from ground zero now to really try and rebuild again.
Yeah, I think Glenn, there is a tendency for less strong managers or sales leaders to micromanage at this stage. How many sales calls has somebody made? How many meetings have they done over VC? You know, how many notes have they entered? You know, and managing in that form, which is, I don't think is healthy. I think the reality is with it that customers are, as we said before, are expecting value, and so helping with increasing that building of pipeline, but with a focus on quality rather than just the quantity is really, really key.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think those are, for me, are the key pieces around that. And I think you've just got to be really granular on understanding what's happening within your organization. I go back to what we were talking about with pipeline. Is it clean? Is it accurate? Does it make sense? Is it really going to close? And having honest conversations with salespeople about it, making sure they're vested in the numbers that you're putting forth as your targets is really important. Because if the target is totally unattainable, you're just going to have a demotivated sales force. So you have to have people really kind of buying into at least a piece of what you're doing from the strategy, and then helping them by week, month by month, attacking those targets rather than looking at it as a big number.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I just get you to go to the slide with an offer? We'll continue to answer the questions. If you have any further questions, please put them on. But I just wanted to throw this up on the screen now. Both the gentlemen have offered their time for the first, for the 3 sign-ups to actually, people are on the webinar today. If you are looking to diagnose where is your sales transformation currently at, then both David and Grant would love to have that conversation with you, complimentary conversation, to have that conversation from a holistic point of view. Where is your sales transformation at? So that'll be for the first 3 sign-ups there today. So just go to that link that you see there, or the QR code. Just while we leave that there, and it's a big question that Rahul's got, and I think you've answered as well. How do industries, from a sales point of view, how are industries actually going to be protecting that manpower? Because obviously there's some big shake-ups happening all over the world, different industries. You mentioned our furlough there before, David. What else from a sales point of view could they be putting in place?
Unfortunately, that's not a magic wand. I wish it was. No, look, that's a difficult question. Because, I would say every single client of mine at the moment is reviewing 2 things. Fortunately, they're all doing it the right way round, which is they're actually reviewing their strategy before they look at their structure. I've seen a few that have been chopping heads all over the place and haven't really considered what their strategy might be coming out of this, which would be a fairly significant mistake for quite a lot. Look, it's a difficult question to answer. I personally believe that a lot of my clients are going to reevaluate the size of their teams, and if not the size of their teams, the focus of what their teams are doing. A number of them are increasing the number of key client managers they've got to have deeper and better relationships at that top end, which I think is great. A lot of them are thinking around the lower end, if you want, of the client categorization, managing them a lot more remotely than they have done previously, and therefore moving outside salespeople into an internal type role. I can see that happening a lot, and that in itself will manage costs, because obviously you're going to be paying those people less. There's also obviously a lot more digital website, web ordering, that sort of stuff coming into play as well. So there's a whole ream of things that are going to impact that. And to say, how do we protect it, I think is a difficult answer, a difficult question to answer at the moment, I should say.
I think there's a piece we haven't really touched on, which is around compensation, which is always a hard subject, and sales compensation in particular. I think, when I showed you some of those stats from Revenue Collective, one stat I didn't show you was that, at one point, around 40% of firms had taken pay cuts in sales organizations. And a lot of senior leadership have actually taken pay cuts. I know a number of firms where they've taken 25% or they've forgone their bonuses for this year. So I think there is a piece around there. There is a dialing back of potentially to keep headcount. There's a dialing back of potentially of base salary, if you're legally able to do that, and a ramping up of compensation, of variable compensation. So, you start putting accelerators in place. If people want to keep jobs, one way of doing it is to change the compensation mix. It's not perfect, but it means that everyone's aligned, right? You want to do well because you want to get more commission. The company does better, then it's better able to support its staff. So there are ways of looking at that kind of stuff, all difficult conversations and really, really very challenging. But I think, as David said, no magic wand.
Yeah, and if I can just say from personal experience, I've lived through 2 downturns when that exact thing happened to me. Reducing your base salary and upping the level and amount of compensation you got. And I actually, in the first year after that, earned over 25% more than I would have done under the old scheme. So it can work in your favour if you're that way inclined.
Right. Just before I wrap up, is there one key message, gents, that you'd like to leave with the people who are on the webinar today? One key message from both of you?
If I can just reiterate my one about sales leadership's a contact sport. It's about staying close. It's not micromanaging, as Grant said, which is a very good point, but it is about being close. You know, the same way that we need to build trust with our clients, we need to build trust with our sales team. We need to be there for them, supporting them. I like the idea there, the last question, how can I get my sales team motivated in this economic climate? We've got to help them be the best they can be, whether that be through better product understanding, better selling skills, giving them the right direction, making sure there's clarity in our messages. Stay close. It is a contact sport.
Couldn't agree more. I think the piece that I would reiterate is just focus on what you can control. Because reality is you can't control the external environment. You can control how you adjust to it. And that's important. And that's going to mean difficult decisions. But I think the most successful companies are where the teams are vested in the success of the company, which means they need to be included. And you can control that. So focus there, and that will help you be successful in the environment that we have.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, gents. Just want to call out, they've had a couple of people who are online send me a message in regards to the actual sign up. They've had trouble with the actual link. You must capitalize the T and the C. That does matter. Or just use the code there for that to work. And also too, the video will be available. Yes, to answer that question, the video will be available. Okay, gents, thank you very much for your time today. It's from a sales transformation, from a focus looking forward. There is hope. There is opportunity. No matter whether it's wholesale, retail, customer service, there's opportunity for all of us. I know certainly at Awaken Group we've had to pivot our business, as many others have. So thank you both very much for your time today. And for those who, we've got one spot left from an actual company point of view. So as I say, use the barcode there. So thank you both very much. If I can just go to the next slide, thank you. For everybody who's on the webinar, the next webinar, we've run the 3 webinars now. The next one will actually be in 4 weeks' time, and we're going to be talking about, following the transformation theme, we'll be talking about designing transformations with inclusion and cultural competence. So, which is obviously an important theme and value for a lot of values-based organisations. So, thank you once again. If you have any, if you do have any questions that haven't been answered or you haven't been able to submit them, please just email them through to us. You have our link, and the gents will be able to answer those from that. So once again, thank you very much for your time today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to seeing you again, David. See you again, Grant, in the near future.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn.
Everyone's time.
Thanks everybody for dialing in. All the best, and stay safe.